this episode, we're going to make personal information feel less mysterious by turning it into something you can recognize quickly and categorize calmly, even when a question uses unfamiliar examples. Many new learners picture personal information as a short list of obvious items like names and addresses, and then they get surprised when the exam brings up identifiers that are indirect, combined, or created through analysis. The skill you're building here is confidence, the ability to look at a data element, a data set, or a data flow and decide whether it relates to an identifiable person, where it likely comes from, and why a business would want it. That skill matters because privacy program work depends on knowing what is in scope before you can manage risk, rights, retention, and accountability. We'll walk through types of personal information, common sources inside and outside an organization, and the most common business uses, with an emphasis on plain language and practical judgment. When you can do this quickly, you stop guessing and start reasoning like a program manager. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A strong place to start is with the idea of identifiability, because that is what turns ordinary data into personal information. Personally identifiable information, PII, is information that can identify a person either directly or indirectly, and indirect identification is where beginners often hesitate. Direct identifiers are things like a full name, a government-issued ID number, or a unique account number that points to a specific person without needing extra context. Indirect identifiers are data points that do not name a person by themselves, but can identify someone when combined with other information, like a birth date plus a zip code plus a device identifier. The exam is not trying to trick you into classifying every data point perfectly in isolation, because real privacy programs treat identifiability as contextual and risk-based. Instead, you should train yourself to ask two questions. Could this data reasonably be linked to a person, and how much effort would it take in this environment? When those answers point toward easy linkage, treat the data as personal information and manage it accordingly. Once you accept that context matters, it becomes easier to group personal information into categories that behave differently from a risk and governance perspective. One category is identity and contact data, which includes names, email addresses, phone numbers, mailing addresses, usernames, and customer IDs that connect a person to an account. Another category is demographic and profile data, which can include age ranges, household information, preferences, and characteristics that help a business understand a person as a type of customer or user. Another category is financial data, such as payment details, billing history, and transaction records, which are often high impact because misuse can lead to fraud or direct harm. Another category is health and wellness data, which can be extremely sensitive even when it is not collected by a healthcare provider, because it can reveal private conditions or vulnerabilities. Another category is location data, which can be as simple as a shipping address or as detailed as real-time movement patterns. Categorizing this way helps because the category often hints at the likely source, the likely business use, and the level of protection that makes sense. A particularly important concept is that some personal information is observed, some is provided, and some is inferred, and those three behave very differently. Provided data is what a person gives you directly, like when they fill out a form, create an account, or contact support. Observed data is what the organization collects by watching activity, like app usage, website clicks, call recordings, purchase history, or device signals. Inferred data is what the organization creates by analyzing provided and observed data, like predicting interests, estimating income range, assessing churn risk, or determining likely next purchase. Inferences can feel less obvious to learners because the person never typed them in, but from a privacy perspective, inferred data can still affect people in powerful ways, especially when it influences pricing, eligibility, or targeted messaging. A mature privacy program treats inferred data as part of the processing story because the creation and use of inferences can introduce fairness issues, transparency challenges, and unexpected impacts. If you remember this trio, You will be less likely to miss personal information that is created through analytics rather than collected explicitly. Now let's talk about identifiers that show up in modern systems, because these are common in exam scenarios and they are central to understanding data sources and uses. Device identifiers, cookie identifiers, advertising IDs, and other persistent tokens can be personal information when they can be tied to a person or used to single them out over time. Even if the organization does not know the person's real-world name, the ability to recognize the same user repeatedly and build a profile can still create privacy obligations and risk. IP addresses and network identifiers can be personal information in many contexts, especially when combined with timestamps and activity logs, because they can connect behavior to a household or individual. Account identifiers are another high-yield type, because many business processes revolve around account-based relationships and access. The exam often expects you to recognize that these identifiers are not harmless just because they look technical, since they can enable tracking, profiling, and linkage across services. When you see a technical identifier in a question, pause and ask whether it supports singling out, linkage, or inference, because that is often the privacy-relevant point. Personal information sources inside an organization are usually easier to picture, but it helps to name them clearly because exam questions often describe sources indirectly. Customer relationship systems store identity, contact, and interaction history, often including notes from sales or support that can contain unexpected sensitive details. Transaction systems store purchases, refunds, subscriptions, and payment events, and these systems are often tied to fraud detection and financial reporting. Support systems store tickets, chats, call recordings, and emails, which can include personal data far beyond what a form collects, because people share context when they need help. Product systems store usage events, clickstreams, feature adoption data, and error reports, which are frequently used for product improvement and analytics. Human resources systems store employee data, benefits information, performance records, and sometimes background check results, which are high impact and often governed by stricter internal controls. Security systems store authentication logs, access records, and monitoring events, which are essential for protection but can also reveal behavior patterns. When you think sources, think systems plus processes, because personal information lives where work happens. External sources matter just as much, because organizations rarely rely only on what people give them directly. Data can come from partners, vendors, affiliates, and service providers that share information for operational reasons, such as payment processors, shipping carriers, or customer support platforms. Data can come from advertising and analytics networks, where identifiers and activity signals help measure campaign performance and target audiences. Data can come from public sources, like public records or social media, though public availability does not automatically make use risk-free or expectation-free. Data can come from data brokers or enrichment services, where organizations append additional attributes to existing profiles, such as business contact information, inferred interests, or household characteristics. Data can also come from devices and sensors, such as wearables, smart home products, or connected vehicles, depending on the business model. The Privacy Program challenge is that external sources can introduce uncertainty about data quality, lawful basis, and transparency, because the individual may not expect the receiving organization to have that data. Exam scenarios often test whether you recognize that external data sources require governance, due diligence, and careful documentation. Another essential piece is understanding that the same data can be personal information in one context and not personal information in another, and that uncertainty is not a reason to freeze. For example, an email address might be a direct identifier in most customer contexts, but a hashed email used as a matching token can still function as an identifier if it reliably links to a person across systems. A device identifier might not reveal a name, but it can still single out a user and connect actions over time, which makes it privacy relevant. Location data might be coarse, like a city, or precise, like GPS coordinates, and the sensitivity increases as precision increases and as patterns become visible. Even seemingly harmless data like timestamps and page views can become personal information when they are tied to a persistent identifier and a behavioral profile. The practical test-taking move is to treat personal information as data about people and their behaviors, not just their names. When you do that, you will manage uncertainty by leaning toward protection when linkage is plausible, which is usually the safer program stance. Now let's connect types and sources to business uses, because this is where privacy management becomes a decision discipline rather than a labeling exercise. Businesses use personal information to deliver core services, like creating accounts, fulfilling orders, processing payments, and providing support. They use it to secure services like detecting fraud, preventing account takeovers, and investigating suspicious activity. They use it to improve products, like analyzing usage patterns, troubleshooting errors, and prioritizing new features based on observed behavior. They use it for communication, like sending confirmations, service updates, and customer outreach, which can drift into marketing depending on purpose and rules. They use it for personalization, like tailoring content, recommendations, and offers, which can increase convenience but also increase profiling risk. They use it for analytics and measurement, like evaluating campaign effectiveness and understanding customer journeys. They may use it for compliance obligations, like tax reporting, record retention, and responding to legal requests. The exam often tests whether you can match a type of data and a business use to an appropriate governance step, like requiring transparency, limiting scope, or conducting a risk assessment. A very common privacy program challenge is secondary use, which is when data collected for one purpose is later used for another purpose that is not clearly within expectations. Secondary use can be intentional, like repurposing customer support conversations to train a model, or it can be gradual, like adding more and more analytics fields to a profile until the data is used in ways the person never anticipated. From a program perspective, the question is not whether secondary use is always forbidden, because sometimes it can be justified, disclosed, and controlled, but whether it is governed. Governed means someone evaluates the new purpose, checks compatibility with existing commitments, assesses risk, updates notices and internal documentation, and implements controls that match the new impact. A good mental habit is to listen for words like expand, reuse, repurpose, share, integrate, or enrich, because they often signal a change in purpose or scope. When you spot that signal, you should think of privacy program controls like reviews, assessments, and stakeholder approval, rather than treating it as a routine data move. It is also helpful to distinguish between operational uses and commercial uses, because they tend to create different expectations and different risk profiles. Operational uses support the service the person expects, like delivering an order, responding to a support ticket, or sending a security alert. Commercial uses often aim to increase revenue or engagement, like targeted advertising, cross-selling, behavioral profiling, or selling access to audiences. Commercial uses are not automatically wrong, but they often require clearer transparency and stronger choice mechanisms, because people are more likely to feel surprised or exploited when data is used primarily to influence them rather than to serve them. This is why the exam may push you to consider whether a use aligns with purpose limitation and whether consent or opt-out mechanisms are needed, depending on the rules and context described. From a program standpoint, this distinction also influences what metrics matter, because operational uses can be evaluated through service quality and security outcomes, while commercial uses must be evaluated through compliance, trust, complaint rates, and reputational risk. When you can classify a use as operational or commercial, you can reason more cleanly about the right governance posture. Employee data deserves special attention because many learners focus on customer privacy first and forget that privacy programs must cover the workforce too. Employee personal information includes hiring and recruiting data, payroll and benefits data, performance records, access credentials, and workplace monitoring data, and each type carries different sensitivities and expectations. Monitoring data is especially tricky because it can be justified for security and operations, but it can also feel invasive if it is excessive or poorly explained. A privacy program should ensure that employee data uses are clear, limited to legitimate purposes, and supported by appropriate transparency and controls, even when the organization believes it has strong business reasons. Employee data is often distributed across multiple systems and teams, which makes inventory and accountability more complex than learners expect. Exam scenarios may describe a policy update, a monitoring practice, or a retention issue related to workforce data, and the right answer often involves clarifying purpose, limiting collection, and ensuring governance oversight. When you think about employee data, think of the same lifecycle discipline. Define what is needed, document it, control it, and review it. Children's data and other vulnerable population data is another area where types, sources, and uses become high impact quickly. Even if the exam does not emphasize every specialized rule, it often expects you to recognize that the risk and sensitivity increase when the data subject may have less ability to understand choices or protect themselves. Data about children, students, patients, or people receiving certain services can require stronger safeguards and clearer decision-making. Sources for this data can include schools, parents, devices, and service interactions, and business uses can include learning analytics, personalization, or eligibility determinations, all of which can produce meaningful impacts on a person's opportunities. The program mindset here is caution and clarity, meaning you should be careful about collection and use, document the reasoning, and ensure that governance considers the potential for harm. A common mistake is to treat all data as equal and focus only on whether it is personal, but privacy programs differentiate because impact differs. When a scenario hints at vulnerability or high consequences, your risk sensitivity should increase and your answers should lean towards stronger controls and stricter governance. A practical way to build confidence is to practice a consistent classification method you can apply to any scenario without needing a perfect memory. First, identify whether the data relates to a person directly, indirectly, or through inference, and if linkage is plausible, treat it as personal information. Second, classify the type, such as identity, contact, financial, health, location, behavioral, or preference data, because types suggest sensitivity and likely controls. Third, identify the likely source, such as user-provided forms, observed product activity, support interactions, internal HR processes, partner feeds, or enrichment services. Fourth, name the business use in plain language, like fulfill service, secure accounts, improve product, market offers, measure performance, or meet legal obligations. Fifth, ask what program control should exist for that use, such as transparency, choice, minimization, retention limits, assessment, or vendor oversight. This method keeps you from being overwhelmed by unfamiliar examples. Because you are not relying on memorized lists, you are applying a repeatable reasoning process. The exam rewards this kind of structured thinking because it mirrors how privacy programs manage complexity. As we wrap up, remember that identifying personal information types, sources, and business uses is not about becoming a walking dictionary. It is about building reliable judgment that supports the entire privacy program lifecycle. When you can recognize PII beyond the obvious, you can scope obligations and risks more accurately. When you can name where data comes from, you can design inventories, accountability, and controls that match reality rather than assumptions. When you can describe how the business uses data, you can spot purpose changes, secondary uses, and high-impact activities that deserve stronger governance. This confidence also improves your exam performance because you spend less time translating examples and more time choosing the program-shaped action that fits the situation. Keep practicing the habit of asking what the data is, where it came from, and what it is being used for, because those three questions unlock most privacy decisions. Once those answers are clear, the rest of privacy management becomes more predictable, more measurable, and easier to run consistently.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.